Hello, friends of Oak Hills. This is Pastor Dale with our weekly video Touchpoint. Today is Thursday, February 13th, 2025. Our Points to Ponder article is titled, Blessed to be a Blessing. The promises made to Abram in Genesis 12, 1-3 are foundational promises for the outworking of redemption. God promises to make Abram a great nation and give him the land of Canaan. These two promises establish Israel as God's representative people during the Old Testament. God preserves this nation even when the people rebel against him as the channel through which the promised Messiah will come. The nation and land are not ultimate promises, but serve the ultimate promise that comes later in verse 3, where God says, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Paul quotes this promise in Galatians 3:8, asserting that its fulfillment is found in the gift of justification by faith alone, made available to all people, all ethnic groups. The nation and land served as a conduit through which Jesus would come to provide atonement for the sins of the world and thus secure the promise of justification by faith alone. Sandwiched between the promises of the nation and land and this promise of blessing all the families of the earth is a promise found in verse 2, which reads, God says, "I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." Some commentators interpret this promise as the same one as the one we have at the end of verse 3, the blessing of all families of the earth. But there is a distinction between the two promises. In verse 2, God says Abram will be a blessing. In verse 3, God says in Abram others will be blessed. Verse 2 says there is a direct link from Abram to the blessing of others. Verse 3 says Abram's family line is a conduit and will produce the ultimate blessing for the world fulfilled in Jesus. What does this all mean? God not only wants to use Abram's family line as the channel through which the Messiah is born into the world, but he also wants his people to be a channel of his grace wherever they are. And this same promise, "I will bless you so that you will be a blessing," is for the church today. Let me point out some scriptures that draws this out. First, when God brings the Israelites out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, he declares to them, before he gives the 10 Commandments, "You shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Exodus 19, 5 and 6. Israel was blessed in their covenant relationship with God, but that blessing was not for them alone. They were to be a kingdom of priests to God. Priests are to be mediators between God and the people. God wanted Israel to mediate God's presence in the world, to be a conduit of his blessing to the world. Peter uses the same language to speak about the church. Peter writes in 1 Peter 2:9, quote, "You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Peter makes explicit the promise of blessed to be a blessing, implying it to the church. The church is God's blessed people so that they may be a blessing to others by proclaiming the excellencies of Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate blessing for the world, but God still intends for his people to be a conduit of his blessing. We have the privilege of sharing the excellencies of Christ, not only through words, but also through our actions and good works. Jesus also highlights this blessed to be a blessing principle that impacts or touches God's people. He says in Matthew 5:16, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to the Father who is in heaven." The blessing of being rescued and transformed by Christ should be evident in how we live so that others may see. Jesus emphasizes this blessing of others through good works after he washed his disciples' feet. He says in John 13:14, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." I believe this is where Paul pulls a statement of Jesus in Acts 20, verse 35. Quote, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." End quote. Jesus set the example for his followers. We are not to be served, but to serve. Jesus has blessed us so that we might be a blessing to others in our service. One more verse. After exulting in God's saving grace in Ephesians 2, Paul says in verse 10, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." The word "for" at the beginning of the verse draws out a conclusion. God saves us by his grace because we are his workmanship. God has plans to use us in bringing his blessing to others. God does not save us to be self-indulgent. God saves us so that we can bless others. So this promise made to Abram in Genesis 12:2 is a promise that applies to you and I. God blesses us so that we will be a blessing to others. In what ways are you blessing others? A couple of highlights to draw your attention to this week here in the middle of February. First, we remind you our missionaries of the month, John and Tricia Dunning, serving with Reformed University Fellowship on the Kansas State University campus. Pastor John is the campus minister there on the K-State campus and working to reach students with the hope of Christ. He is blessing students and equipping other students to be a blessing to others. So let's be praying for their ministry, their outreach, and that God would be fruitful in using them in reaching people on the K-State campus. Secondly, we have introduced pledge cards at Oak Hills once again this year. Our elders are asking those who call Oak Hills their church home to prayerfully consider the amount that they would pledge to give to the church throughout the year. And to write that amount on one of our pledge cards and seal it up in an envelope and submit that so that Jerry Owens could record the fact that you have submitted that pledge. The envelope will not be open. No one will know the amount that you pledge. The elders will not even know who submits a pledge card. Jerry is keeping track of that so that the elders can send specific communication to those who have submitted those pledge cards. There's pledge cards available at church. Be sure to pick one up when you're here. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to touch base with one of our elders here at Oak Hills. And lastly, I wanted to highlight that on March 9th, so in about 3 weeks, we're going to be hosting a Getting Acquainted with Oak Hills luncheon. This is an opportunity for anyone who is newer at Oak Hills and wants to learn more about our church, our history, our doctrinal distinctives, about our denomination, the PCA, and it's an opportunity to learn what it means to be a member of our church. And so if you're interested in that, we would love for you to join us for lunch. It's immediately following the worship service on Sunday, March 9th. And we'll have an opportunity to share more about Oak Hills and what God is doing here in our church. Well, thank you for joining me today for our Touchpoint. I look forward to being with you for worship this Sunday. God bless.